Have you ever met someone who gave you chills for no apparent reason? They smile. They're polite. They seem perfect, and yet something in their eyes and their presence keeps you from relaxing. A deep part of you whispers, something's wrong, terribly wrong. Carl Jung referred to this as the silent danger signal, a phenomenon that defies logic but is instantly recognized by the soul. And in the modern world where masks are meticulously crafted, such signals are no longer rare. They are warnings from the ancient consciousness still alive within you, from the shadows yet to be illuminated. We live in an era where appearances are worshipped more than truth. On social media and the media, and in everyday interactions, everyone strives to become a perfect version of themselves. But Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." So what happens when a person is no longer themselves but driven by the rejected parts of their psyche, the shadows they refuse to acknowledge? They may appear as a friend, a leader, even an ideal lover, and yet they harbor a silent, destructive force. In today's video, we will cross the thin veil between the social persona and the true self to uncover the most dangerous sign within a person, not because they are evil, but because they themselves are unaware of what lies beneath. You'll understand why your intuition warns you before your logic can respond, why someone may unconsciously inflict harm without any ill intention, and why, if you are not aware, you'll be pulled into the same psychological patterns again and again until you see the shadow. I won't promise that today's content will make you comfortable. On the contrary, it may prompt you to question even your closest relationships. But that discomfort is the sign of something awakening. Join me as we journey through the layers of the psyche, from instinct to shadow, to the ancient archetypes that still live and breathe within us. Because the most dangerous sign is not the other. It is the moment you no longer know who you are. And to begin this journey, let's return to that moment when your intuition first rang the alarm, the invisible instant Jung called touching the shadow. In the next section, it'll guide you into a phenomenon he described as the incongruence between language and energy, where words may sound sweet, but the energy betrays something hidden beneath. Are you ready to see the truth behind the mask? There is a strange phenomenon that many have experienced, but few truly understand. You're standing in front of someone. Their words are pleasant, their manners impeccable, their smile seemingly flawless, and yet you feel a chill down your spine. A vague sense of unease rises within, as if a deep part of you has recognized something amiss, even though everything on the surface appears fine. Carl Jung referred to this as a sign of incongruence, when the outward image does not align with the inner energy. And often this is the first warning from the shadow. The danger lies in the fact that the person in question may have no awareness they are emitting a dissonant signal. They believe they are fine, but it is the lack of harmony between what they present and what they carry internally that triggers your psyche even before your rational mind can articulate what you're sensing. In a society like America, where the personal image is curated like a brand, this phenomenon is far from rare. You see it in politicians, religious leaders, media figures. They speak of morality, truth, love, but behind the scenes, scandals unfold. Power is abused. Psychological manipulation takes place. This is not just hypocrisy, it is a psychological split. The persona, the social mask, and the shadow, the rejected parts of the psyche no longer communicate. And in that gap, danger begins to accumulate. Jung believed we are gifted with an ancient warning system, a silent intuition that senses when something is wrong. But modern society teaches us to ignore this intuition, to prioritize surface logic instead. Don't judge without evidence, we are told, but the soul does not always provide black and white proof. Sometimes it offers only a feeling, the chill in a hug, the emptiness behind a smile, the sudden silence in a room when someone enters. In Jung's world, this is not an invitation to judge others, but to look within. Why am I reacting this way? What am I sensing from this person? Perhaps it is judgment disguised as kindness. Perhaps it is manipulation wrapped in politeness. Perhaps it is self-loathing dressed as moral virtue. Whatever it is, one thing is certain: a shadow is at work. If you've ever heard of people with an eerie charisma, leaders who captivate crowds, world changers later exposed for toxic behavior, you've seen the shadow in action. Hitler was once a passionate speaker with a vision for national renewal. Charles Manson attracted youth with words of love and revolution. More recently, we've witnessed online influencers exposed for emotional, spiritual, or financial abuse. All of them shared one trait: they gained people's trust, yet admitted something a few sensitive souls picked up early only to be dismissed as too suspicious. The danger isn't necessarily that these individuals are evil. The psyche is more complex than that. They may be living in a denial, unaware of the fracture within themselves. And it is this lack of awareness that makes them truly dangerous, like someone holding fire unaware they're standing in a dry forest. So how do we protect ourselves? Jung did not advise us to distrust everyone. On the contrary, he urged us to trust our own feelings. Don't judge hastily, but don't blind yourself either. When something doesn't feel right, step back. Observe. Not to attack others, but to understand yourself more deeply. Because often what unsettles you in another is what you've disowned in yourself. The shadow recognizes the shadow. That is a fundamental law of psychology. And this is where community becomes crucial. When you share your intuitive experiences, those subtle feelings that are hard to name, you create space for others to do the same. Instead of feeling crazy or too sensitive, you begin to feel seen. And that is how we build an awakened community, one where intuition is honored just as much as logic. If you've ever felt something was off but couldn't explain why, share it in the comments. Let this be a safe space to explore those subtle impressions to better understand ourselves and one another. And in the next part, we'll dive into one of the most silent yet pervasive mechanisms of the psyche's shadow projection, the phenomenon of unconsciously casting one's own darkness onto others. Because one of the most dangerous ways the shadow manifests is not within us, but when we project it onto someone else. Have you ever been accused of something absurd as if the person saw a distorted version of you? You may have been caught in the crosshairs of their shadow. Let's explore that in the next segment. Have you ever been misunderstood in a strangely unsettling way? You're having a normal conversation, maybe even going out of your way to be kind, and suddenly the other person accuses you. You're trying to manipulate me, or I know you're hiding something. Despite having no evidence, they speak with a conviction as if they've seen some absolute truth. And what's even more unsettling, those around them might start to believe it too. Carl Jung called this phenomenon shadow projection, the psychological act of casting one's inner darkness onto others. It occurs when a person cannot tolerate a part of themselves and unconsciously hurls it outward onto you. They see you, but they don't really see you. What they see is their own shadow projected onto your image. One of the most sobering truths in psychology is this: we don't just hide our inner flaws. We also cannot bear to see others reflect them back to us. So when someone unintentionally triggers the part of us we've disowned, our reaction can be intense. Not because they are wrong, but because they become a mirror for a shadow we refuse to face. Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Shadow projection is one of the most powerful ways the unconscious rewrites the script of your life without your awareness. It often begins with unacknowledged wounds being controlled in childhood, suppressed anger, unspoken shame. These experiences don't disappear. They're buried in the dark. And over time, they seek expression, not through "I am hurting," but through "you are hurting me." So it's no surprise that some people always feel threatened, always sense betrayal, always anticipate manipulation, even though they themselves are the ones unconsciously recreating those scenarios. In psychology, this is called projective identification, where you unconsciously assign someone a role that belongs to your own shadow, and they, if unaware, may end up playing that role, swept into a narrative that isn't theirs. This is one of the most dangerous dynamics in human relationships, especially in intimate spaces like love, family, or even spiritual communities. The person projecting the shadow doesn't realize they are wounding others through their own unhealed pain. And the person receiving the projection, if not grounded in their own psychological clarity, may spiral into guilt, self-doubt, or the sinking belief that they really did something wrong. Think of the woman accused by her partner of being too seductive or unfaithful simply because he cannot face his own jealousy and insecurity. Think of the activist silenced by slander because their truth threatens the collective shadow of an institution. This isn't just theory. It's happening around us every day. Perhaps you've been the target of someone's projection, or perhaps you projected your own shadow onto someone else. That doesn't make you bad. It makes you human. And the most beautiful thing is this: now you're aware enough to pause. Jung did not condemn the shadow. On the contrary, he believed it was essential to becoming a whole person. But if left unrecognized and unintegrated, the shadow won't disappear, it will sabotage you from within. So how do you know if you're being projected onto or if you're projecting onto someone else? When someone accuses you of something you know you haven't done, but they speak with unshakable certainty. When their reaction is disproportionate, as if they're fighting a ghost, not you. When you find yourself repeatedly cast into the same roles like acting in a play you never agreed to join. Pause, observe. Ask yourself, am I reacting to this person or to someone from my past? Who are they really? And am I reflecting something back to them they don't want to see? On this journey, community becomes a sacred mirror. When you share your feelings, your intuitions, your moments of confusion, you don't just begin to heal, you also create space for others to do the same. So I invite you to leave a comment, I have been projected onto, or I have projected. There is no shame in this. Only courage, the courage to look deeper. When we dare to be honest with our own shadow, we also become more compassionate with the shadows of others. And that is the foundation for a truly awakened society. But shadow projection is not the only mechanism that makes people dangerous without knowing it. There is another state even harder to detect where the ego merges with powerful archetypal images. The person no longer merely believes they're right. They believe they are the embodiment of truth. They are no longer just human, they become the chosen one, the light, the savior. This phenomenon is called inflation, the ego's expansion through identification with archetypal power. In the next segment, we'll explore this in depth because it lies at the root of countless cults, charismatic leaders, and even light workers who, in claiming to bring light, cast others into shadow. Are you ready to see the truth behind the glow? Have you ever admired someone so deeply that you forgot they were still human? They enter a room as if carrying light itself. They speak as if they know truths you've never dared to admit. They act as if they embody what is right, what is redemptive, what is infallibly true. And then you begin to feel small. You question your own thoughts when they differ from theirs. You stay silent when something they say feels extreme, because how could the light ever be wrong? Carl Jung called this state psychic inflation, the ego's expansion through identification with powerful archetypal images, such as the savior, the enlightened one, or the bearer of ultimate truth. This is one of the most dangerous psychological states, not only because those in it rarely realize it, but because they can lead entire communities down a misguided path disguised as enlightenment. Unlike ordinary arrogance, which says I'm better than you, psychic inflation whispers, I'm not just right, I am the embodiment of rightness. This creates a dangerous feedback loop. The person truly believes in their elevated status, and others drawn to the glow reinforce that belief. Slowly, the individual dissolves, and what remains is a massive shadow cloaked in the form of absolute truth. History has shown us this pattern repeatedly. Dictators like Hitler believed they were divinely ordained to purify the world. Extremist missionaries believed they were saving souls as they suppressed dissent. Today it wears gentler labels: spiritual leader, enlightenment coach, energy healer. But if you listen closely, you'll hear the same undertone: I am not merely human, I am a messenger of the light. Why is this so dangerous? Because when someone fully identifies with an archetype, they lose the capacity for self-reflection. They can no longer see their own flaws because every action, no matter how harmful, is justified as being for a higher purpose. When criticized, they do not respond as ordinary people. They don't listen. They don't question themselves. They say, you are opposing my mission, therefore you are opposing the light. In Psychology and Alchemy, Jung wrote, anyone who has passed through such an experience knows how dangerous the inflation of the ego can be, not only for the individual, but for those around them. Are you close to someone like this? Watch for the signs. They never apologize because they are always right. They speak with the tone of a prophet. Their words feel like commands from the universe. They reject differing opinions because to differ is to be wrong. They surround themselves with agreement and cast out those who question them. The most insidious part is this: they often do possess admirable qualities, wisdom, inspiration, depth of vision. But once the ego fuses with the archetype, there is no one left to ask, am I overestimating my own power? And it's not just they who suffer. We, those around them, if we are not awake, will be swept along. We hand over our power, place blind trust, sacrifice our boundaries, and sometimes lose our own voice. Because their light is dazzling, and we, yearning for guidance, become mesmerized. This is not a call for condemnation or cynicism. It's a call for awareness. As Jung once said, the brighter the light, the darker the shadow. Awakening means being able to admire someone while still keeping the ability to ask questions. It means daring to step outside their halo and ask, am I giving away my life to another person? Or worse, am I beginning to believe I am that person? In the journey of psychological growth, everyone goes through a phase of feeling special, chosen, called to a great mission. But without humility, without feedback, without an awareness of human limitation, we risk falling into the greatest trap of all, believing we are enlightened when in fact we are merely blinded by false light. You're invited to share in the comments. I once followed someone whose light seemed irresistible, and here's what I learned. Your story might help someone else avoid the same path. We are building a community not of worship, but of awakening grounded in inner freedom and conscious reflection. And if you've ever recognized inflation within yourself, that's not failure. That's maturity. That awareness is true light, the kind that rises from within, needing no applause. In the next segment, we'll explore another mask, seemingly harmless but equally dangerous, the persona, the social mask. When we over-identify with the roles we perform for the world, we risk losing touch with our true self. And the buried shadow one day will demand to be seen. Are you ready to remove the mask and face who you really are? Have you ever felt empty amidst a room full of perfect social smiles? They appear impeccably dressed, eloquent, subtly expressive, yet behind their eyes lies a strange distance. It's not hostility you sense, but a quiet disconnection between who they truly are and the mask they wear. Suddenly, it feels as though you're speaking to a character from a play, not a real living human being. This is the persona, the social mask. Jung spoke of a necessary shell for survival, for adaptation, for acceptance. But when the mask becomes the only identity, when you disappear beneath it, that's where danger begins. Persona, when the social self swallows the true self. A person with a flawless persona can be especially magnetic. They speak at the right time, smile with perfect grace, navigate social situations with charm, always aim to please, so much so that you begin to wonder, who am I really engaging with, a person or a social construct? In a world where image is content, persona is no longer a costume, it becomes armor. But when armor turns into skin, the true self is pushed into the shadow. Jung warned that over-identification with the persona is a betrayal of the self, a guarantee of eventual psychological collapse. There are real people who leave you speechless when they enter a room, the executive who always says the trendiest thing, the influencer whose camera smile never fades, the friend whose social media posts are always perfectly curated. But when the lights go off, you might hear a sigh, a sign that the mask has grown too heavy to carry. Jung noted that with a persona too rigid, the shadow becomes increasingly suppressed until it erupts with intensity through emotional breakdowns, behavioral extremes, or psychological crises. A person overwhelmed by their social identity eventually experiences an inner collapse, a breakdown that comes without warning. Warning signs when the mask begins to crack. Watch for signs like someone always saying "I'm fine" in a tone too rehearsed, like a line from a script. Their presence is polished, never vulnerable. Their smile never spontaneous, but always performed. Under stress, they don't cry, they go numb, detached, as if programmed to appear strong at all costs. These are signs that the persona has devoured the authentic self. And when the true self is buried, the shadow doesn't vanish, it accumulates, ready to explode at the weakest moment. A real-world story when persona destroys creativity. Consider Ziggy Stardust, the character David Bowie created to channel parts of himself. While playing Ziggy, Bowie was radiant, consumed with the desire to be seen. But when Bowie the man was submerged beneath Ziggy, the persona, he suffered a psychological crisis and had to kill Ziggy to survive. In corporate leadership, you'll see those who perform success flawlessly, but never allow themselves to be tired. When stress mounts, instead of admitting vulnerability, they shut down, armor up, and some fall into severe depression. Because there is no space left to be human, only to perform perfection. The same happens in online communities. Someone builds a flawless identity for their followers, but when challenged, they don't engage, they delete, block, exile. The persona becomes a defense system, not a bridge. Can you recognize your own persona? If you've ever felt a certain fakeness in your own behavior or crumbled under the weight of perfection in a relationship, you are not alone. When you comment, I once asked myself, is this really me or just my social version? You help create a safer space here. a place where we don't need to be perfect, only seen. When we collectively admit that persona is inevitable but must not dominate us, we create a community where authenticity and healing are possible. When we dare to remove the armor and look at who's underneath, we begin to live with the softness and honesty of the heart. But there's still another face of the shadow we must face. Persona is one kind of mask. But there's a deeper danger, not that we are hiding something, but that something else hides us. This is when the archetype takes over, when the personal ego is drowned in a larger-than-life image, and we become lost in the role of the superhero, the idol, or the eternal victim. In the next segment, we'll explore another subtle but potent danger, archetypal possession, when you are no longer yourself but only a symbol. Between persona and archetype lies the territory of the true self, and that's where we're headed next. Are you ready to look beyond the mask and into the essence beneath? Have you ever felt like you're reliving the same tragedy, like a slow-motion film on endless repeat? And no matter what you do, you can't stop it from playing again and again. Welcome. Today we step into part 5, what Carl Jung called the compulsion to repeat. This is one of the darkest corners of the psyche, a loop in which the soul unconsciously returns to the past, not to suffer but to try and heal, even though it often leads to deeper wounds. Have you ever wondered why you keep attracting the same kind of person, the same pattern of pain, the same emotional storyline, even after swearing? This time will be different. Jung said that until we recognize what lies beneath the unintegrated shadow, the unconscious will keep recreating it as a strange attempt to resolve what remains incomplete. Psychological roots. Freud first introduced the idea of repetition compulsion, the urge to reenact traumatic events in an unconscious attempt to master them. Jung expanded this concept. It's not just behavior, but unresolved psychic energy, a complex that weighs on the psyche and pulls us back into our old wounds. What repeats is never random. There is a gravitational pull, a hidden force that draws us back to familiar pain, even when we know it can only end in familiar heartbreak. Real-world examples. Someone who was once betrayed continues to fall for emotionally unavailable people because the unconscious seeks a chance to finally control the wound. A person who grew up feeling unsafe constantly chases intense attention only to feel abandoned again and again because they're unconsciously rehearsing the original script, hoping for the security they never had. As dangerous as it is, the power of the familiar often outweighs the fear of being hurt again. The deeper spiritual layer. Jung believed that the way out of this loop is not to suppress the symptom, but to transform it. In his words, turn the symptom into a symbol. This means not merely reliving the pain, but interpreting it, elevating it, making it meaningful. When we do this, the cycle stops being a trap and becomes a threshold for growth. If you recognize that you've been repeating a pattern, even if you've tried to break free, I invite you to share your story here. Simply saying, "I know I'm repeating, and I want to stop," is a powerful act of courage. When we speak it out loud, we're no longer alone, we're part of a community. A place where we don't stop at awareness, but move toward healing. The compulsion to repeat is the invisible trap of the past. But there's an even deeper danger, archetypal possession, when a person doesn't just reenact old pain, but is overtaken by a powerful archetype, losing touch with their authentic self. They begin to live as a symbol, the savior, the warrior, the eternal victim. We'll explore this together in the next part. Are you ready to step out of the loop and recognize the archetype that may be shaping your life? Have you ever felt as if you were under a spell drawn to someone whose energy was so powerful, it made you wonder, is this still a person or a living symbol? Welcome to part 6, where we enter one of the most mysterious and dangerous aspects of Jungian psychology, archetypal possession, when a person is no longer themselves, but becomes the embodiment of a primordial image, an archetype that shapes their behavior and emotions from the shadows. Think of people you've encountered. A normal conversation turns into something else entirely. Their eyes light up, their voice no longer feels personal, but as if a messenger from beyond is speaking. In that moment, you're no longer talking to a person, you're speaking to a symbol. Carl Jung believed that when an archetype is activated or constellated within the psyche, it can possess the individual, compelling them to act, speak, and feel under the influence of this ancient force rather than their conscious self. At that point, they are no longer I, but the living vessel of a force much larger than the self, the savior, the tyrant, the martyr, the eternal victim. This is archetypal possession. Such individuals become pliable to this inner directive, not from personal will, but from the archetype itself. They lose contact with their individual ego, and in doing so sacrifice the capacity for self-reflection. You've likely heard of spiritual gurus with massive followings who radiate as if they hold the key to a new era, or political leaders who exude absolute conviction, inspiring belief that they are visionaries beyond time. This is the signature of archetypal possession, where the person doesn't just play a great role, they are possessed by it. Jung warned that such figures often have a hypnotic effect, influencing the unconscious minds of others without even realizing it. When you are no longer a person in a conversation, but a light, a symbol, a myth, you don't just lose your softness. You lose your empathy. You lose the human boundaries that protect mutual understanding. How do you recognize when someone is possessed by a symbol? Watch for these signs. They don't just inspire, they speak as if voicing the soul of the collective. When criticized or questioned, they don't respond as a person. They feel betrayed, as if their entire belief system has been attacked. Being near them feels like standing before a representation, not a breathing, feeling human being. This is not healthy admiration. This is the subtle signal of a person being moved, even controlled by a symbolic force larger than themselves. Let's create connection share if you've experienced this. If you've ever found yourself drawn to someone only to later realize you are not speaking to a person, but to a symbol, you're not alone. Feel free to share. I once followed, then I woke up. That simple sentence may help someone else find their way back to themselves. This space is not for judgment, but for awakening from hearts that have wandered and found their way home. Archetypal possession is dangerous because it reduces a person to a puppet for an invisible symbol. But there is another equally hazardous expression: over-identification with the persona, when a person becomes so fused with their outer role that their inner self disappears completely. In the final segment, we'll explore the extreme case of the persona, when it is no longer a mask but the only identity. And when the persona becomes the ego, the repressed shadow becomes all the more volatile, waiting to erupt. Are you ready to step out from behind the symbol and finally meet the person in the mirror? Beneath the vast sky of the inner world, light and shadow are forever intertwined. When we dare to look deeply, truly into that darkness, it is in that very moment that we begin to touch the inner truth, the self longing to be free from layers of disguise and imposed beliefs. The journey you've just followed through the subtle mismatch between words and energy, the mechanism of shadow projection, the inflation of the ego when it identifies with an archetype, the social mask of the persona, the unconscious loop that drags us back into the past, and finally the state of being possessed by a spiritual symbol. These are not distant theories. They are mirrors reflecting the very path so many of us are walking. In the Jungian journey, the end is never a final stop. It is a threshold of awakening. For when we recognize the shadow, we are no longer ruled by it. Instead, we transform with it, transmute it, and allow it to become the strength of consciousness. As Jung once said, what you resist persists, what you accept transforms. So we bid farewell to false images and invisible patterns and move toward freedom, the freedom to admit our weakness, our imperfection, the freedom to share emotions without fear of judgment, the freedom to understand ourselves more deeply, and through that to see others with new eyes and a heart of gratitude. If this video awakens something in you, whether just a fleeting feeling or a profound recognition, then the question remains, what will your next step be? Share in the comments, I see myself in that sign, or I am struggling to recognize my persona, or I was once the guide, but now I wish to return to my true self. Your words may not only bring healing to yourself, they may also light the way for someone still standing in the dark. And if you wish to continue exploring the depths of the psyche, reflecting the soul, and building a community of awakening, don't forget to hit subscribe and like, not for the algorithm, but because you choose to walk with the light within.